Some games are about hardship and adversity, like they want you to be so weak there's a real satisfaction to overcoming some difficult obstacle or foe. Some games, though, they just want you to feel like an unstoppable badass. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 of the most badass video game abilities. Starting off at number 10, Blackout from the WatchDogs series. This is probably the most instantly recognizable ability in the entire WatchDogs series, because there's no other hack or ability that you get in the games that manages to totally encapsulate the feeling of being a badass hacker than Blackout, which pretty much does exactly what it sounds like. It shuts down everything electronic in a huge radius around you. It was mainly useful for escaping pursuit by police or dealing with armed guards if you're surrounded, but the effect of a rolling blackout around you is so cool that sometimes it's just kind of fun to use it to see what happens. I mean, it's pretty much an instant chaos button. The power has been in this franchise since the beginning, and it was even featured in the very first trailer of the original game. The developers clearly knew that this was a cool as hell power. Actually using it in the first game was kind of a pain because you actually had to craft it using parts. It wasn't just something you could use. The sequel did make it easier though, even if it was kind of a high level power that you had to actually unlock. In Watch Dogs Legion, you actually don't get it, and it's sorely missed because evading pursuers in this game can be a huge pain. They did bring it back with the Bloodlines DLC, where you can play as Aiden from the first game, but it's not as useful here as it used to be. Blackout is kind of the signature ability for Watch Dogs though, and regardless about how you feel about the actual games, it is a pretty damn cool power. At number 9 is Time Stop and Time Blast from Quantum Break. Remedy are kind of the masters of cool powers in games. I mean, they basically invented bullet time in video games with Max Payne. Remember the cool slowdown time reload from Max Payne 2? That was pretty badass, and maybe even should have been on the list. But probably the game with the coolest powers, in our opinion at least, is the underrated Quantum Break. You know, the one with time powers. They came out with this game back in 2016, and the time powers were kind of old hat by then, but they really took it to the next level. Probably the coolest abilities are the Time Stop and the Time Blast. With Time Stop, you can create a bubble where time is completely stopped. It's great for stopping enemies completely, but even cooler is the ability to stack bullets. When you fire at enemies trapped in the Time Stop, the bullets freeze in place and are immediately released all at once when the power wears off, blasting the enemy with all the bullets you fired at them all at once. It is a cool as hell effect that can absolutely destroy enemies that are hit by it, and it's just really satisfying every time. The Time Blast, on the other hand, is about as straightforward as it gets. You just charge up a huge explosion and take out every enemy caught in the blast. What makes it so badass is the effects though. Instead of just a regular old explosion, you get this crazy effect where it looks like reality is shattered, followed by this shockwave effect that warps everything around it. In a game with cool effects everywhere, it's one of the absolute coolest, and it's, again, just incredibly satisfying to use every single time. At number 8 is Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance's Blade Mode. It's sort of Platinum's specialty, making games that are as over-the-top badass as possible, and this game might be their crowning achievement in that category. The combat is intense, but once you get the hang of it, you basically feel invincible, and a big part of that involves the signature feature for the game, Blade Mode. The funny thing is that Platinum didn't actually come up with Blade Mode. It's a holdover from the original version of Metal Gear Rising that got canned, but clearly they knew that there was a good thing there because they made full use of it. You know exactly what we're talking about here. With the press of a button, you get direct control over the sword, and you can use it to slash enemies into as many pieces as you could possibly want. It only works when they're vulnerable, so it's kind of an elaborate finishing move, but it is so satisfying to get to the end of a tough fight and just slash away at an enemy that was giving you trouble. Mechanically, the main reason to use it is to steal enemy electrolytes, which give you a health and energy boost, but it's almost its own reward just because of how satisfying it is to use. So the game giving you a big incentive to use it all the time is kind of only icing on the cake. Some of the best moments in the entire game incorporate Blade Mode, and it's never not fun to use. Sometimes when the game requires more precise cutting, it's a little bothersome, but in general, it's just all around fun as hell to use, and incredibly badass as well. At number 7 is Shapeshifting from Prototype. Most of the games listed so far want you to really feel like a hero, but this game is all about making you the ultimate monster. There's a lot of badass powers in Prototype, a game where you can basically play as the Thing if you combine it with Dante from Devil May Cry, but probably the overall, at least in our opinion, badass ability is the shapeshifting. Yeah, it's fun as hell to elbow drop a tank from 1,000 feet, I'm not gonna lie, but the parts of the game where you really feel like a monster, the sections that require you to be a little stealthy. The ability to absorb enemies and take their form is cool enough, but the fact you can do stuff like accuse other soldiers of being infected or even call in airstrikes is just badass in an evil way. For a game that manages to make you feel unstoppable in both stealth and combat, the game manages to make it so you can actually die really quickly if you're not careful, and that is fairly impressive. And number 6 is Domino from Dishonored 2. The Dishonored series is all about being a badass supernatural assassin, and there's some pretty awesome powers you can use in these games. Most of Corvo's abilities from the first game, while awesome, don't completely break out of the Bioshock model of abilities. They're really good, and they can be badass as hell when used properly, but for us, the most badass ability in the series is in Dishonored 2. It's called Domino. It's about as simple as it gets compared to some of the more outrageous stuff we've highlighted so far, but it's really fun and it's really satisfying to use. How it works is you can connect up to 4 enemies together, and whatever you do to one of them, it does to all of them. So knock one out, they'll all collapse at the same time. Pulling off a really good domino isn't easy. Like, the enemies have to be close enough to one another for the effect to work, so you have to be relatively close to tag them. But once you set everything up, you really feel like a true badass when you manage to take down every guard in a room. Like, it even gets better when you combine it with other powers like Shadow Kill that makes enemies disappear instantly when killed. Honestly, all of Emily's abilities in Dishonored 2 are cool as hell. They're a little weirder than Corvo's more traditional arsenal, but if you use her abilities correctly, they are bad as hell. And number 5 is the Orbital drop from Infamous Second Son. Another game with some pretty weird powers. Where the older Infamous games had more standard elemental powers like electricity and ice, Second Son gets a little stranger, introducing stuff like smoke, neon, video, and concrete. And while all that's really cool and interesting in its own right, we're gonna stick with the basics here and say the Orbital drop power is pretty damn cool. In Second Son, you get these abilities called Karma Bombs, which you have to have charged up, filling your karma meter with either good or evil karma. You get good karma by helping civilians and subduing rather than killing enemies, and you get bad karma for going on killing sprees. Either way, Orbital Drop is basically the karma bomb for the smoke ability, and even though it's the first, it's probably the most badass. I mean, look at it. You transform into smoke, fly up into the air while Delsin gives you a little more space before crashing down on the ground below. It was really one of the first next-gen moments for the PS4 when they debuted this power in the trailer, and it's still pretty damn impressive even today. It even looks like something that would be in a cutscene or something in earlier generations, but it's all in real time in this game. You even control Delsin as you torpedo towards the ground, just to make it extra clear that yes, this is in-game. The Infamous series has a bunch of awesome powers that are fun to play with, but for abilities that really make you feel like a superhero, it's hard to beat Orbital Drop. And number 4 is Smoking from Vanquish and the Saboteur. There's nothing cooler than smoking, at least in video games. All the cool dudes in gaming smoke: Solid Snake, Kazuma Kiryu, Duke Nukem, Arthur Morgan, the list goes on. I am not saying that smoking in real life is cool. You would not catch me dead with a cigarette in my mouth, just doesn't happen. But some games take things to the next level. They don't just let their characters smoke as part of the story, they actually have a smoking button. In the Saboteur, one can light up whenever you want by pressing L3 while standing still. It's not exactly the most badass thing in the world, but it's always cool when games include a little extra bit of detail. What we did want to talk about really is Vanquish, Platinum Games' stab at a Gears-style third-person shooter. And it's a pretty damn good one at that. The whole game's over-the-top ridiculous, but as a way to make the main hero look even more badass, you can light a cigarette while taking cover. This isn't a game like Saboteur where there's a lot of downtime. It's pretty much all combat all the time. So the only time this guy gets the chance to light up is when bullets are whizzing over his head. It actually does have a mechanical purpose too. You can distract enemy robots with a discarded cigarette. Honestly, it's not that useful as a distraction though, but it's fun as a little ability, and it's neat that it's even possible. And even Sam smokes in moderation. You can actually use the smoking ability 3 times per stage, so after that, you have to stop. Smoking, not good for you. In games where it has no consequence at all, where you can do things that you would never do in real life with no consequence at all, yeah, it can be pretty badass looking. And number 3 is the Bloodletter from Bloodborne. Most games from Software aren't exactly badass. Sure, you can feel truly powerful when you manage to take down a seemingly impossible boss, but most of your abilities aren't particularly flashy outside some notable exception. Like Bloodborne, definitely a game where you play more of a bona fide badass. Yeah, you still get your ass kicked, but you're doing it wearing tailored threads and some gnarly looking weapons. In our opinion at least, this thing's probably the most badass, the Bloodletter. It doesn't look that noteworthy when you first look at it, kind of an ugly looking mace, but when you transform the weapon, that's when you see how badass this thing is. Like, just look at this. Your dude stabs himself through the chest with a mace, and pulling it out transforms the weapon into a two-handed blood weapon. That's just metal as hell. There's no other word to describe it. Even if it does a good chunk of damage with your health when you transform it, any weapon where the player sacrifices health for power is gonna be at least a little badass. But when you combine the crazy transformation animation with how beastly the weapon looks in its second form, you got one of the most badass weapons out there. And number 2 is Weaponization from the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Yeah, Radical Entertainment's on this list again with their game that basically inspired Prototype. While this game is incredibly cool on its own, I think the whole weaponization ability from this game is just a little bit more badass. This game takes the ethos of Hulk smash to the next level. Like, the amount of destruction you can unleash on this world is amazing, and there are so many fun abilities that you can use to do it. When you grab certain vehicles, you get the option to weaponize them. Depending on what they are, Hulk will rip them apart and turn them into brass knuckles to increase his damage, flatten them, turn them into a shield, a boomerang, rip off rocket pods on a tank, throw them at your enemies. It's just incredibly fun to take an enemy and transform them to something useful, as well as add a layer of strategy to all your actions. This is an ability we would love to see return in some future game. The powers have a lot of variety and they're a ton of fun to use, and it's just really badass to pull off. And finally, the Devil Trigger from the Devil May Cry series, especially in 5. When it comes to games about badasses who do badass things, the Devil May Cry series is king. These games are all about making the main guy look like an unstoppable badass, even if a lot of that basically only happens in the cutscenes rather than the game itself. But when it comes to badass powers in the game, there is not much that is iconic as the Devil Trigger is. When the meter is filled, Dante, or whoever you're playing as, will transform into their demon form. How this works depends on the game, but in general, it'll make you a lot stronger and usually unlock some new and powerful abilities. It's especially badass though in the newest game, Devil May Cry 5, where the effects and animations just really sell how powerful this form is. It's so badass that when the enemy does it, like during the final boss of DMC5, you have a good reason to be afraid. There are a ton of badass moves and moments from the Devil May Cry series, but for number 1, you gotta go with the Devil Trigger. It is iconic. That's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.